Just a word of warning real quick. This is not a cryptid story, nor is it a ghost story or haunted doll or house story. This is a real, visceral story. So, audio discretion is advised. When my 4-year-old son asked me if that it was true that Santa Claus went down chimneys to give gifts, I should have done like all parents and nodded approvingly. I should have embellished it the way my own did, by explaining that Santa's enormous belly was made of the same material as gummy bears, which is why he could squeeze himself down chimneys without any problems. I should have told him about the cookies and the milk, the elves and the red-nosed reindeers. Instead, I said something that had my wife's brow quirking, and a death glare sent at me. We live in Texas. Do you know how many times he would have been shot to death if he did get into the stranger's house from the chimney? I quickly realized my error, so, to fix it, I played it like the home security salesman that I am. Thomas, don't worry about it. Santa Claus doesn't go down chimneys. He doesn't need to since we have a perfectly usable front door. All he has to do is use some magic and he can get inside no problems. Now, the kid wasn't convinced, but my wife seemed to forgive me, at least temporarily. I'm not a bad dad. I just didn't want to lie to him and tell him that it was okay for a guy to get down our chimney. Maybe I've lost a bit of the Christmas magic, but also, I've always been more of a down-to-earth guy. I thought the story of Santa just needed to be more realistic. And after that, we dropped Thomas at the daycare and hoped for the best that no children would laugh at him for thinking Santa just went through doors. He's a good kid. I don't want to ruin Christmas for him so early. Maybe I should have just let Mary answer him, but he asked for Daddy's answer. And I sell home security systems, not dreams. I did what I could with the means that I had. So, Mary and I went to buy the last presents. A stuffed tiger for our little beast, and some fancy wine glasses for Mary's sister, who is supposed to visit us for a few days between Christmas and New Year's. The day went by as it normally would, and we were both glad when it ended and we were back with our little angel in our home. I hate holiday shopping, and I hate wrapping gifts even more. Unfortunately, since I'm a better gift wrapper than I am a cook, Mary sent me wrapping while she prepared dinner. After all, Christmas was the next day, and Santa wouldn't do a shoddy job by not wrapping his gifts. Thomas was watching his favorite cartoon in the living room as I finished stuffing the last present in our closet, far from his gaze. I closed the door and stared at my night table for a few seconds before opening it. This year was special. Mary always said that she wanted our son to be old enough to understand. To marry me. She wanted him to be the ring bearer, so he could have a beautiful memory of his parents' marriage. And I thought 4 was old enough, and I think we waited long enough. I've loved her for over 15 years. She was my high school sweetheart, and I couldn't see my life without her in it. So, this year, I was going to propose to her for Christmas. I reached for the little black velvet ring box, and I gave it a little caress. Out of all the gifts this year, this was the one, the best one, that I could think of. And well, the best part? She had no idea. I closed the drawer and went into the dining room so I could have a meal with my wife and our son. Now, normally we would go over to her parents on the 24th, but they bought an apartment in Santa Monica, and they were going to spend time over there instead. So we both decided to keep the holidays to ourselves this year, and, well, I couldn't agree more. After his bath, I put Thomas to bed, telling him again how Santa was going to leave him so many presents. That he had been such a good boy this year, and that good boys always get lots and lots of gifts. And frankly, it wasn't false. I made a lot of money, so of course he was going to be spoiled rotten. Thomas had the heart of an angel, though, so I wasn't worried he would sour like milk if I kept spoiling him. He was too kind for that. Just so very kind. Early Christmas morning, he jumped into the bed with myself and his mother about 3 a.m, giggling excitedly about Santa. I was half asleep, so I didn't realize until the light turned on, and Santa was staring at me. Gnarly yellow teeth that are barely hidden behind a fake, dirty white beard. A glass eye that seemed to be staring deep into my soul, and a real eye that had my blood run cold as I met its gaze. I stared in horror at the stranger, who even from where I stood in my pajamas was far from smelling like gummy bears, milk, and cookies, more like Pabst Blue Ribbon, piss, and malice. I swallowed heavily as he tilted his head and gazed at Mary, who was sleeping like a log. I could probably sing the national anthem and bang the drums before she woke up, but I knew I had to wake her up. I pulled Thomas to me as he kept smiling at Santa and then at me, excited as any little boy who thinks he was worthy enough to meet Santa Claus. Mary. My palm was moist as I reached for her delicate shoulder, giving it a small shake. She didn't reply. I shook her a little harder. Mary, Santa's here. My soul felt like it was leaving my body. I heard her moan, and I clenched my hand hard on her shoulder. She had no choice but to wake. I knew I had to do something to keep her from screaming. I didn't see a weapon on the guy, but I didn't want to learn about it the hard way. Instead, I pulled Thomas to her so her maternal instincts took over her fear. It was a good decision, in retrospect. Instead of screaming, she latched onto him like a mother bear protecting her cubs. And it was time to meet Santa. So, Santa, how did you get inside? Santa didn't say. Simply pointed at Thomas and told us what a good boy we had. Thomas giggled excitedly and said that he unlocked the door earlier when I was talking with Mary because, and I quote, he wanted to make sure Santa could get in and leave us some gifts. Mary whimpered, and I moved away from the bed. Santa clicked his tongue at me and his gaze became somber. Behind his greasy, curly black hair, I could see the way he looked at Mary. I took a step forward and he stared back at me. Without having a word to say, he made me understand that I needed to stop moving. Let's go to the living room, shall we? He smiled and I tried to argue that we could leave Mary and Thomas to discuss Christmas plans while we talked, but he didn't even acknowledge me. We all went down to the living room where he had us sit near the Christmas tree, far from any phone or windows. The ball in my throat was expanding rapidly, and I prayed to God that he would just rob us and leave. But there was something evil about him. I still can't explain what it was about him that made me feel that way, but I felt like there wasn't anything good about him. You know how they say serial killers are charismatic, and you would never recognize a psychopath if you met one? Well, they're probably right. But this guy was the opposite of how you would see a charming serial killer. The human body has 7 trillion nerves, and he was getting on every single one of them. I feared for my life, but I feared even more for Mary and Thomas. And this felt like a story where someone would have to play the hero. And heroes don't live very long in real life. This wasn't a movie. Nobody was going to burst through our door to save us. There was a man in our living room, threatening us with his very presence, and everything about him reeked of hostility. I almost expected him to go jigsaw on us and ask us to play a game. But he didn't. Instead, he gazed at Mary. just kept staring at her with an indescribable expression. And I would love to be able to say that it was lust, because at least it's something I know. But the look he was giving her wasn't humane. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen, movies or real life. It was otherworldly and evil. And then he smiled again and stared at Thomas, who had gone quiet and lost his smile. Because for as long as a kid can get excited about Santa, he probably realized something was off with him. It probably had something to do with the fact that Mary was breathing rapidly and trembling, and that my eyes couldn't let go of him. "Daddy?" I heard him, but I was frozen. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the fake Santa, wondering what was going to be his next move. And then he reached out for Thomas with his bony fingers, trying to pull him toward him. It wasn't aggressive. It was almost gentle, but I couldn't stop myself. "Don't you dare touch him!" I slammed the fake Santa's hand away from my son and pulled him back to me. Thomas stared at me in absolute shock. Santa's grin only stretched further, revealing missing teeth and others that were probably rotten from the inside out. He chuckled deep. Nothing like the sweet, cheerful ho-ho-ho that my son would be expecting. And I felt his little body shiver against mine, and I tightened my grip on him. "Oh, I don't think so. Come over here, kiddo. Santa's got a gift for you, and your dad's going to let go right now if he doesn't want to ruin Christmas." My throat went dry. My heart stopped pumping blood, and Mary let out a choked sob. She couldn't handle it, so she started begging. But Santa only told her to shut up and stay calm, that nothing bad would happen as long as Thomas was a good boy and came over to get his gift. He stretched his hand and Thomas took it. Because, well, he was a good boy. And because he was just so kind. And that's when I saw it. I saw the gun. When he pulled Thomas to sit on his knee, wrapped his arm around his tiny waist, and dropped the weight of his handgun on our little boy's lap. I told him I would give him anything he wanted, cash, the house, everything, as long as he didn't hurt him. He passed his fingers through Thomas's hair and said he wasn't going to hurt him. But the way his single eye stared at me with morbid amusement made my stomach clench, and I knew this was a lie. Everything was screaming at me to throw myself at him, to give a chance to my wife and kid, but in the very marrow of my bones, I knew it was futile. I turned toward my wife and pulled her toward me. I held her as tightly as I could to try and calm her down, her sobs and tears obviously starting to affect Thomas, who was starting to wiggle upon Santa's lap. He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. How could something so small and so pure see the wrong when he has known none? He wasn't prepared for something of this scale. His little mind wasn't forged by years of horrific newsflash describing human cruelty in vivid details. He didn't know anything bad. Maybe we sheltered him too much, but 4 years old. Come on. Thomas, who do you like more? Your mother or your father? The question shook me and left me puzzled. I didn't understand, or rather, I didn't want to understand. I didn't want to see where this was going. I didn't want to. Come on, boy. Answer the question. You can't get anything, you know. If you want your gift, well, you have to answer Santa's question. Mary clung to me as Thomas stared at me with questioning eyes. He wanted to know what the right answer was, but I couldn't give it to him because I had no idea what was going on in that insane imposter's head. All I could think about is that I needed to be a human shield. I needed to protect them all, but I didn't know how. We had no panic button installed in the house. There was nowhere we could go without him shooting us in the back. Thomas hesitantly started answering. He told Santa how he liked me better because I never scolded him. But then, how he liked his mommy better because she made his favorite food in the world and played with him. He told the imposter how I had no time to play with him, and I felt tears prickle in the corner of my eyes, burning and heavy as they finally slid down my cheeks. My heart was so tight, it was like I was being stabbed repeatedly in the middle of my chest. Seeing me cry had Thomas pause, and unfortunately, it meant he didn't give a straight answer to Santa. It didn't seem to displease the monster. Instead, he took Thomas off his lap. Go, Thomas. Go give a hug to the one you love the most. Thomas didn't move. It's because he was just so kind. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He was 4 years old and he already knew what picking one over the other would hurt the other. And if he didn't know, he felt it. And I don't blame Mary for what happened next. She stretched her arms, calling Thomas to them. It was probably her maternal instincts wanting to hold her baby for what could be the last time. Thomas didn't resist, and I saw his beautiful face twist in agony as he ran toward her. Mommy? He hugged her, turned his face toward me, and then I felt a pressure in the middle of my chest. A pressure I'd never felt before, followed by a vivid pain and the feelings of my lungs collapsing. Unfortunately, I didn't pass out fast enough, and I saw Santa shoot my baby boy and my wife. I heard him laugh as I lost consciousness. A laugh so manic and diabolical, I hoped I would never wake up. But I did. Unfortunately.